I would like to start to ask you about how do you read the U.S. election so far, and who is winning at this point?
First of all, I need to say that the American Jewish Committee is a strictly nonpartisan organization, so we don't endorse, we don't oppose parties or candidates. Having said that, I follow the polls, and the polls would suggest that today, which is 10 days before the November 3rd election, it looks like Joe Biden is ahead. I did listen to Donald Trump earlier today, who said quite confidently that he has different polling data and different expectations. So it may go down to the wire.
Yeah. And how concerned are you that there was no question about foreign policy or any mention by the candidate about their foreign policy perspective and views?
I mean, for me, as an American, it's very concerning. Foreign policy and national security were largely missing from the Democratic primary debates. They were entirely missing from the first presidential debate. And then the second presidential debate, it was given about 15 minutes, but much of it was trading accusations about, who was getting money from whom. I mean, I know from long experience now that every president of the United States, every president is going to face major foreign policy and national security challenges. Some are foreseeable, some are not, but they are inevitable. And therefore, getting a better sense of how a president would deal with these issues, whether it's a Cuban Missile Crisis that John Kennedy had to face, or the World Trade Center attacks in 2001 that George Bush had to face. Those threats are there, they're real. So I feel very, if you will, saddened that these have not been part of the general debate.
And there's lots of question, especially when it's come to Biden's view on Iran, which is a central issue in the Middle East. Do you see any concrete policy from the Biden campaign when it's come to Iran nuclear deal, about their plans, about how will they plan to approach Iran? Because they're saying that Trump has been too harsh on Iran, withdrawing from the deal was a mistake. Do you see any plans from their campaign with regard to Iran?
Well, the Biden campaign does speak about Iran when they're asked, and the Democratic Party platform does include reference to Iran. I believe their basic approach is to try to return to the JCPOA of 2015, which of course the Trump administration withdrew from in 2018. Now, would they return to the deal as it was written? Would they try and rewrite the deal, which is my impression? Would they be successful in enlisting the support of Britain, France, and Germany in particular? Are questions that remain to be seen, but there is a policy difference. Donald Trump stands by what he believes was withdrawal from the worst deal in history, as he says, and replaced it with maximum economic pressure on Iran, which he believes is working, and he believes, if he's reelected, will lead to Iran coming back to the table, weakened, but forced to come back to the table, versus the Democratic Party position, which is that the withdrawal from the deal has isolated not Iran, but the United States. And therefore, the United States needs to re-engage with our allies in order to be able to put maximum pressure on Iran. So there are two very different approaches to Iran between Biden and Trump.
And behind all that, there is that approach that remains among many Democrats that were part of Obama administration, that strategy of let's make a balance between Saudi Arabia and Iran, divide the region among them, which was highly problematic in the region and caused a lot of suffering in the region. Are you worried that the Biden administration will go back to that strategy?
I understood from our dealings with the Obama administration, in particular with Secretary of State John Kerry and his team, that this was not just a transactional deal as it's sometimes portrayed, that they try and portray it as just a narrow deal. This was really intended as a transformational deal by the Obama administration that would transform Iran's orientation and the balance of power in the region. We at the American Jewish Committee thought that this was a mistake, that this was a product of certain self-delusions, that President Rouhani, for example, was not going to become the President Gorbachev of Iran, who would lead, as Gorbachev did, the Bolshevik Soviet Union to a new reformist, modern, more outlooking country, which of course eventually collapsed. That Rouhani was not Gorbachev, which some in the administration here at the time thought. So I think there's a certain naivete about Iran as it was and as it is. So if Joe Biden wins, we will do everything possible, by the way, as the Sunni Arab countries in the region, as Israel will do, to try and persuade the Biden administration to take a new look at Iran and to test their assumptions of 2015. And perhaps it'll work. I mean, after all, what's interesting here? The countries that are closest to Iran are the most skeptical of Iranian behavior. The countries that live sort of more safely in Europe, and some here in the United States across an ocean, feel that they can manage Iran more skillfully, whereas the countries closest, the Sunni Arab countries, the Kurdish people, Israel, view Iran very differently and far, far more suspiciously.
Yeah, and which is absolutely a wrong perspective. I mean, people in the region know more than the people are far, obviously, and this comes down to interest. The question is it in the United States national interest, from your perspective, to engage with Iran like it did back in 2015 with the nuclear deal?
The answer is it all depends how the engagement is framed. In other words, I don't think that our position is to say, do not engage with Iran under any circumstance, because you cannot believe anything they say, you cannot believe any promise they make. Rather, it's how one approaches Iran. And we thought in 2015 that we were in a very strong bargaining position for two main reasons. Number one, because the sanctions at the time were working. And number two, because we collectively had driven oil prices down, which weakened Iran's principal source of income. And yet, if you look at the balance of power in the negotiation, Iran, with a weak hand to play, we believe outsmarted the Western nations who had a strong hand to play. So for us, the issue is not sitting at the table. It's how one understands the dynamic of the negotiation and who has the power and who knows how to exercise the power vis-a-vis the other. The Democrats would say, our goal is to deny Iran a nuclear weapon. And the JCPOA was a flawed deal, but nonetheless, it was a way at least of buying time. That's the main argument, as I've heard it from the Democrats. The Republicans are saying, by contrast, the deal was weak, it was full of holes, the Iranians were cheating, and we cannot trust the deal. So instead, we have to put maximum pressure on Iran in order to bring them back to the table with a new deal that's much more foolproof and that doesn't just touch the issues in the last deal, but what about ballistic missile development? What about full access to military sites in Iran? What about the sunset clauses? On October the 18th, just a few days ago, the arms embargo on Iran ended.
Yeah, it expired at the UN.
Legally, Majid, legally. Iran can go to Russia, to China, to Turkey, to other countries. The United States will try and stop them. But legally, they can go. And that's only the first of the provisions that expires.
And do you think the current sanctions that the Trump administration put on Iran is working? And do you believe in President Trump's theory that after I get reelected, in a month, Iran will come begging for a new deal and we will make we'll make a deal with Iran in a month, just like in the North Korea style, in a way.
So from what I understand, the sanctions are having an impact, a real impact, driving down the value of the currency. For example, denying quite a bit of market share to Iran. That's all true. As to President Trump's assertion that a month after I'm reelected, Iran will come crawling to the table, remains to be seen. First of all, we need to see if Donald Trump is reelected or not. And then a month later or 2 months later, whether Iran does come calling or even crawling. I think it's fair to say that Iran wanted to wait and see what the outcome of the American election would be. I mean, in a sense, if I may say so, I understand them. If there were two different visions of Iran policy in Washington, well, wait till November 3rd or November 4th or whenever the election will be decided and announced, and then assess, are you going to be dealing with the Democratic administration? Who's being appointed to the key positions? Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, head of national intelligence, head of the CIA. Are they hawkish? Are they dovish? Who are they? And in the second Trump administration, who are the key appointees? And then begin to play your cards according to your assessment of which administration is in power, how comfortable are they with exercising not just soft power, but hard power, how inclined are they to go either unilaterally or multilaterally. So these are things that remain to be seen. Yeah. Until not just the day after the election, but I would say the months after the election.
Mm-hmm. But no question that the Biden administration will be, let's say, softer on Iran. I want to go to the question of the Kurds and for our viewers. Last year you were very outspoken against your organization and yourself against the President Trump's decision to withdraw from Syria. I had the honor of being invited by your organization to speak at one of your events that you organized specifically here in New York to support Kurds. I want to hear from you, again, your organization's position when it's come to the Kurdish issue in the Middle East.
So, with pleasure, because for us, for the American Jewish Committee, for me personally, the Kurds feel like brothers and sisters. I mean, there's something for me very compelling in the Kurdish story. And I say for me as a Jew, I relate very comfortably, very easily, I think, to the Kurdish narrative, the Kurdish quest. And therefore, it seems to me that Kurds and Jews as if you will, shared neighbors in the Middle East have always had commonalities, have always had not identical interests. No two people have identical interests, but we have overlapping interests. And it's always been striking to me, and I've been outspoken about this, that I was embarrassed and ashamed when this administration abandoned the Kurds, or appeared to abandon the Kurds, who had been our staunchest partners and allies, and we left them behind. And I had to speak out. If your brothers and your sisters are being abandoned, are being left to others, to enemy forces, to adversaries, we have to speak out. And the second thing I've been very outspoken about, Majid, is this kind of hypocrisy, and I don't know another word for it, where there is a 24/7 obsessive, relentless, unending focus on the need for a Palestinian state. And yet, the very same people who insist that the Palestinians must have self-determination are, by and large, completely, totally silent, invisible, absent when it comes to self-determination for the Kurdish people.
Or against it, or they speak against it.
Or they speak against it. And To me, this is such blatant hypocrisy. I mean, at least be consistent. So if you're against self-determination for anyone, be against self-determination for everyone. If you're for self-determination for the Palestinians, okay, fine. You're right, absolutely. But why then are you opposed to or silent on self-determination for what? 30, 35, 40 million Kurds who have a distinctive history, a distinctive language, a distinctive culture, who've demonstrated in northern Iraq, for example, that they can govern themselves and bring values which are otherwise glaringly missing in that part of the world, including the role of women and a certain balance between religion and state. So why the silence? And I don't get good answers. I've been asking these questions publicly. I've been asking them in social media. I've been asking them elsewhere, and I don't get good answers. So for me, the Kurds have every right to self-determination. And for me, the Kurds are the natural friends, allies, and partners of the Jewish people and of the State of Israel.
And do you think the U.S. should have, in their foreign policy, should support an independent Kurdistan in the long term?
I believe that, but I've already heard so many times the arguments of others, these very elaborate, esoteric arguments that really boil down to, we don't want to jeopardize the nation-state system that's been built in that part of the world. And that, of course, begins with the conversation about Turkey. And every administration that I've worked with, including the Bush administration, the second Bush administration, the Obama administration, the Trump administration, has somehow, in the end, been kind of drawn in by Turkey, and therefore convinced that nothing should be done to jeopardize Turkey's interests as Turkey defines it. And then you have, the fragility of Iraq. And then you have the looming question of Syria with all of its internal complexities. And then, the conceptual policymakers in Washington say, well, yes, in theory, of course, they should have the right to self-determination. Yet, on the other hand, we have to respect the existing nation-state system and the fragility of the region. And if we do A, the consequence will be B, which will trigger C, which will create a catastrophe for D. So the problem is aligning the theoretical belief that, yes, Kurds deserve self-determination with the actual realization of an effort to achieve it.
Yeah, and the number one reason is Turkey, which is increasingly becoming anti-NATO, I would say, although being a member of NATO, anti-Western and anti-Israel very clearly. Recently we saw on the website of the presidential website of Turkey saying Jerusalem is ours, things like that. So that might shift the dynamic in future or not. That's not clear yet. So I want to go to a last topic I want to discuss with you, which is anti-Semitism. Right now I'm making a report about anti-Semitic beliefs throughout the Middle East. People have these, unfortunately, common myths and belief about Jewish people in the Middle East, and it has historical, of course, reasoning. But even the people who are not necessarily have hate or anything against the Jewish people, they have these myths. For example, one of them is the old one is that Jewish people are controlling all the banking system in the United States and the West, and they're controlling even the political system. And I wanted to hear from you how is best to debunk these myths, especially in even among even Kurds in the Middle East, even among other populations in the region.
So I think there are several strategies here to deal with this issue. And of course, you're right to raise this issue. Number one, most people in the Middle East today have never met a Jew. It's a simple fact. I will illustrate. My wife, who's now in the next room here, in our apartment, was born and raised in an Arab country. My wife's first language is Arabic. My wife's favorite music is Kulthum and Farida Lutrash and others. But by 1967, when she was 16 years old, she and her 7 brothers and sisters and her parents were driven out of their home in Tripoli, Libya. They were in hiding for 3 weeks as mobs were looking for Jews, and they were given safe passage. Majid, there is not a single Jew left in Libya today. Not one. Not one. Jews have lived in Libya for at least 2,000 years since the Roman period. Now, why do I mention this? Because if they left in 1967, that was 53 years ago. Someone in Libya today would probably have to be close to 70 years old to even remember a Jew, potentially a neighbor, a doctor, a lawyer, a merchant, a shopkeeper. So, by and large, no Libyan today has met a Jew. Same in Iraq, same in Syria. I can keep going. So anti-Semitism, ignorance, bigotry thrive when you have no contact. And instead of the contact, instead of humanizing people, you instead have sermons from some Islamist imams, from certain media, from certain political leaders who use anti-Semitism as a tool, as a weapon. So number one, most people have never met a Jew.
Absolutely.
Number two, the good news is that peace is beginning to compete with war and conflict in the Middle East. As you and I speak, we had the wonderful news that Sudan is becoming the 5th Arab country to normalize relations with Israel. Now, I want to believe, Majid, that with normalization will come humanization. The best news that came out of the Abraham Accords for me, for example, last month, there will be 28 flights a week between the United Arab Emirates and Israel. 28 flights a week. How many people will be traveling back and forth? How many people will be meeting each other, working together, learning about each other, doing business together, studying together? This is the way you overcome anti-Semitism, by bringing people together, and not by allowing the extremists to define who you are as a Kurd, who I am as a Jew, who he is as an Israeli. So, if you will,
Human interaction, yeah.
the block of peace is beginning to compete with the block of war. And I think long term, this is the best answer. And now with the news of Sudan, and we met with the Prime Minister of Sudan already a year ago, and he began talking to us. This was quietly. I want the Jews from Sudan to come back. Not necessarily to live. I understand that they have new homes in Israel or Europe or the United States, but I want them to come back. They're part of our history. Let's restore that history. Let's restore the synagogue. Let's create a museum. Let's introduce people in Sudan to the fact that there were Jews here for many years, and the same in Libya, and the same in Iraq, and Algeria, and Syria, and on it goes. So this won't happen overnight, but we're beginning to see the change. And the last thing I would say is, and we at the American Jewish Committee are also creating links with major Muslim institutions in the Middle East, including in Saudi Arabia. And last year we signed a memorandum of understanding with the Muslim World League in Mecca. And this year, with their leadership, we traveled together to the Nazi death camps in Poland, to Auschwitz, to Birkenau. And we stood together, and we mourned together, and we resolved together, no to genocide, no to anti-Semitism. So we're fighting back. We're fighting back as best we can, and now we have more and more partners.
That's beautiful, and certainly a partnership of your organization. You know, IJC is one of the oldest Jewish advocacy organization in the United States, more than 100 years. And with this, we are coming to the
We're
end.
actually the oldest Mujib.
The oldest. Wow,
Right.
that's incredible. 1908.
1906.
Oh, it's 06. Wow.
But for your viewers, I was not there in 1906 at the creation of the American Jewish Committee.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
It's my great pleasure, and all my best to your viewers.
Thank you.